Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is Sunday, December the 5th, 2021, and I'm going to do something completely different than how I usually approach things. I usually sort of set the scene up here, and I usually have a couple of overhead shots that I've taken a picture of previously, so I sort of have the thing set up. What I'm wanting to do is I want to sort of do a riff on the newspaper for the day, and I'm going to just do that cold right now. If I don't do it cold, I'm never going to get the thing in for today. So let me just start up. I'm going to open up the paper here. I'll do the wide shot in the room here so that you can see that I'm actually opening up the paper. It's today's Sunday New York Times. And there were two or three things that were sort of jumped out at me. One, there's a story at the bottom of the page here, in the front page. He ran without firing a shot and ended up on death row. So there's this guy down in Alabama, notorious for putting black people in jail and executing them. And he was a low-level, involved with the drug trade. Forget about his background. That makes it even more compelling, his history. But he's not a violent person. He's the guy that's delivering the dope and collecting the money. Well, he's in this house. And there's a misdemeanor warrant out on him. Well, the cops break into the house, and he runs away. Somebody else in the house shoots a cop. The guy that ran away, that didn't have a gun, is getting executed. The guy with the gun, who shot the people, is not getting executed. That's the page one story. On the back of the second section, the second of the opening section, at 78, he's still alive and he's no murderer. Here's a guy who's at 78 years of age, he's eligible parole. There's DNA evidence proving that he hasn't done this crime. Having said that, because he's eligible for parole and the way the whole system is working, he needs to express remorse for a crime he didn't commit. And the guy is so committed to the truth, you don't lie. You don't lie is what this guy taught. This guy is so committed to the truth that he apparently will more than likely not get out of jail. They will not parole him because he's not going to express remorse for a crime he didn't commit. Talk about Alice in Wonderland. It gets more insane by the day. France has been really grabbing my attention lately. My name is Duchesne. I have a French-Canadian heritage. My father left the town in Massachusetts, Fall River, Massachusetts, where he came from. He left the family early on. He couldn't stand the prejudiceness of the family. The French-Canadian family was sort of everybody other than French people to them were dirty. Dirty Portuguese, dirty Spanish, dirty. Everybody was dirty. So he didn't like that. And when he came to New York, he actually lived with Chinese people, which the French family, the dirtiest of all the dirty. These dirty Chinese people. And that's who my father lived with when he first came to New York. And over the years, he became very friendly with many of them. And as I was growing up, I would eat in these exotic Chinese restaurants. We'd be in the back room with food that never came out to regular customers. The gels and really weird exotic stuff. So that's a little bit of my build-up to the French story. And interestingly, 2 weeks ago, the local IJ newspaper had an article about thousands of people in France marching to protest or about women's rights. And they were protesting the abuse of women in the society and how they're denigrated and treated badly as sex objects, blah, blah, blah. And thousands of people in cities in Paris, in Marseille, and all over the place. Le Mans, all over the place, thousands of people. In the local IJ newspaper, this is a lead article on the front page. New York Times on the same day, no mention of that at all. And there's an article about a French aristocratic woman who back in the late 80s is murdered, and her Algerian gardener is convicted of the murder. And she's found in this locked-in room in this basement with blood written on the wall that says Hugo did it, or did it say Hugo did it? There's one letter in the few words with an accent aigu over the first E, which changes the meaning of it. And it's argued that she was an intellectual and would know the correct meaning. Part of the arguments was, well, maybe she wrote it wrong. Insane article. I read this, and it went from the first page over to inside, and almost 4 columns. They never gave the second translation of the opposite meaning. It was really weird reading this. You find that a lot in these stories. They give you all sorts of peripheral information, but then, boom, don't get to the punchline. At the end of this, they talked about how the aristocrats were heavily against reopening this case. The guy that did it is already out of jail. He's already expressed his innocence 1,000,001 times. It's obvious he didn't do it. And it's almost obvious that this was an inside job done by somebody in the family, and she had a little bit of a rift. You could see why some of the aristocrats in France would not have liked her. So that was interesting, and the really conclusion to this was right before Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day, I'm at a dinner, and I meet a woman who has just come back from Paris, who is French, lives in Paris, and her daughter was translating for me. And I thought, oh, perfect idea, place to bring these 2 articles up. So I bring the articles up to the woman, and I bring up about the protests in France and whether she was aware of them. Well, the response is, they are always marching. Who would know? They're always marching in France. They're always protesting something. No, I don't know about that particularly. Then I asked about the French aristocratic woman. Same response, completely nonplussed. No, I haven't. I do not know that. No. Well, these aristocrats, God knows what they're up to one day to the next. So this French attitude is really interesting. My own personal experience in France, when we were on our trip a few years back, our little European trip, as we crossed the border into France, there was no sign that said "Welcome to France" or anything like that. But suddenly, I just started crying. I started emoting, and it felt like Oklahoma on steroids with cathedral music in the background. That's the way it felt to me. And Paris itself, oh my God, I was never been so taken with a city in my life. Born and raised in New York, I've always considered New York a pretty cool metropolitan city, although it's on a severe decline, has been for years right now. Well, Paris, to me, is without a doubt the last bastion of Western civilization. The last bastion of Western civilization. I'm not going to say more about that now. I want to get to this little article. That was my little lead-in. So here we are on page, where are we on page 6. An agitator tries to win votes a la de Gaulle. Well, this is right, yesterday's New York Times editorial page had a big editorial about this character here in France. And he's this right-wing guy, he's sort of a semi-Trumpian, digging up, agitating with all the immigration issue and make France the way it used to be, this type of thing. But the punchline to this whole thing, this guy wrote a book back in 2006 called The First Sex. And he was a journalist at the newspaper there in France. And the punchline here is, he argued that France had declined because of the loss of male virility and the feminization of society. In a subsequent bestseller called The French Suicide, a few years later, 2014, he waxed lyrically, you won't believe this one, he waxed lyrically about the world before feminism, when a bus driver could, quote, slide, you might have to look this word up, slide a concupiscent hand, C-O-N-C-U-P-I-S-C-E-N-T, he could slide a concupiscent hand, I haven't looked it up, I'm not even going to bother, over a woman's backside without risky prosecution. So he's waxing for the days when a guy could grab a woman without having any consequences. he's trying to make himself out to be a de Gaulleist. And de Gaulle said in his London speech, "The flame of French resistance must not be extinguished and will not be extinguished." He's trying to dig up this quote of him to sort of throw you back to "let's make France great again." But of course, the resistance that France, that he was talking to, that de Gaulle was talking to, was against anti-Semitic ideology and racism. The opposite. Much like Trump, this guy takes things, flips them inside out, repeats them a couple of times, and makes it part of his little platform. All right, that's the end of my little riff on France. Page 12, a cocaine tsunami spreads gangs, violence, and corruption across Europe. There's a port in Belgium where they have intercepted 100 tons of cocaine this year. Well, during the pandemic, there was a big lockdown, and a lot of people weren't at these ports and things like that. And since the European Union has been opening up again, there's a big influx. Cocaine coming from Colombia and coming from parts of South America. 100 tons have been confiscated this year at the port. And they're talking about this huge booming market and how the Netherlands are the staging port for the cocaine trafficking out of the country, and how it's the gangs, these small gangs have been taken over by large gangs, and there's a huge explosion of shootings, bombings, torture, and murder on the continent connected with the booming cocaine market. At the end of this here, they're talking about the fact that there's more than 6,400 people working at the port and 80,000 other people depending on the workings of the port. If you look at the amount of people involved in the business, it feels like everyone is involved. They're talking about corruption from the guys that are taking the stuff off the docks to the guys that are signing the waivers, and the people that are putting it into the trucks, that are people that are waving the trucks through. They're finding corruption every level of the way throughout the entire movement of the cocaine through the ports. And I think that was really well, yeah, the other one, I don't like to get into too much Trump stuff, but the January 6th panel is targeting the obscure law. Trump tried to cling to power, and there was this obscure law written in 1887, which it's so convoluted, it's almost nonsensical in its wording, which everybody agrees is. But it allowed Trump to have sort of a wedge in to maybe discount all the other electoral votes that were there. They're trying to change this right now, and everybody up till Trump has agreed that they ought to get rid of this stupid thing and fix it. But because of the incalcitrant Republican resistance to any type of election reform, Republicans appear to be putting a roadblock in the way of this bill. All right, that was it from the news section that I found, let's say, interestingly compelling, other than the fact that in Afghanistan right now, because of our sanctions, it appears as if there's a huge, hunger catastrophe looms in Afghanistan, and it looks like there's something like 22, almost 23 million people who are, which is half the population, are expected to a life-threatening levels of food insecurity. Half the population is at the point of life-threatening levels of food insecurity, and of that 22 million, almost 9 million are nearing famine right now. Winter is setting in. We've maintained our strong position of the embargo. They can't, the sanctions, not the embargo. Interesting human interest story. How fast can a person fall to earth? How fast can a person fall to earth? In case you've been jumping out of planes, you're just an ordinary skydiver. There are skydivers that are, like Tom Cruise or these Bond movies where the skydivers jump out and get themselves going real fast. Well, the normal speed for a skydiver jumping out of an airplane is like about 100, 120, 130 miles an hour. Well, what these guys are doing is they're jumping out of the plane backwards, getting themselves completely parallel with the earth. Once they get parallel with the earth, they're then bringing themselves in, fixing up their body, flipping themselves around, and then starting to go into a dive. Some of them are moving 320 miles per hour, 316 miles per hour. The woman's world record, 285 miles an hour. They're flying, they're coming down at 300 miles an hour. And this one guy who's been developing this jumps out of a plane 5 to 10 times a day for the last few years. How fast can a person fly to Earth? Interesting story if you're into skydiving. Bobby, don't try it. Don't try skydiving there, Bobby. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this quickie up here. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. There is good news. There is good news, and I did post one positive picture. I took a minute to do one picture. Regal rebound. Regal rebound. What we're talking about here is the monarch butterflies. The monarch butterflies have come back. For the last, quite a few years now, there's been less and less and less of these monarch butterflies that usually habitate down by Pacifica. In fact, a few years ago, a relative from back east came here, and she came specifically to see the butterflies. We stayed at a little motel right near Butterfly Haven, and zip, none. And there have been less and less and less and hardly any. Well, they finally have made a rebound this year. And in the article that I've got posted, do I have it? Yeah, it's still posted above me, above the book there. All right, let's bring this into the closer shot here. Okay, I'll get rid of the big 180 degree angle. When the article was written, they were saying that there were no butterflies in Marin County, where I am right now. Well, within 24 hours, I spoke to people out on the coast in Bolinas, and they had spotted half a dozen of the butterflies there. Within 36 hours, there was butterflies, monarchs spotted in town. So the good news is nature is making a comeback with the monarch butterflies. So everything isn't bad news all the time. There is good news out there, and seeing some good news from nature is really, really encouraging. The other, I didn't get to make a photo of this one. The other one was the famine to feast, and this has got to do with the salmon. And storms get salmon spawning season off to a robust start. Well, last year there were hardly any salmon coming upstream in the Lagunitas Creek, running from the coast right into town here. And right now, where there were none last year, or 2 or 3 maybe, now there are 70 they're finding in packs. So many that some of the salmon are getting confused and not sure who they're supposed to be mating with. So some of them are mating with, some of the coho salmon are mating with non-coho salmon, and they're like, whoa, getting a little weird there. But those are both good news. The salmon are coming back. The monarch butterflies are coming back. The world might look like it's going to hell in a handbasket, and it probably is, but it's the world as we know it. So I'm sure there's going to be a rebirth and a reconstitution of a whole way of looking at things. Quick segue to the top. These are the 2 books that are on my carry-around list this week. Christians Against Christianity. Fabulous book. I've been working on an essay about this same topic myself for quite a while, and it was Progressive Magazine had a review of this book about a month ago, so I got this book. I've started to read it, and how the right-wing evangelists are destroying our nation and our faith. The other book over here is the Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. And this is absolutely, let me get it off. Okay, I'll get back here. Is absolutely, this is turning everything I have, well, I did my rap about Adam Smith, where I find in Adam Smith where he endorses slavery. This book unearths the whole basic philosophical basis for all of the Enlightenment, literally. This guy has got archaeological information that he has elucidated really well in this very deep book. And we're going to talk about this more, but I highly recommend you get a copy of the book or get the audio version. It's an easy listen to. It's easier to listen to this book than it is to read the book, but I have both right now. I'm listening to it, and this allows me to go back to the book and underline sections that I want to take a look at. But he's basically taking Rousseau and Hobbes and Locke and the whole crowd of them and flipping them on their head, pointing out that the concepts of freedom that we're running around with today were completely negated in Europe. Didn't have a twitter of thinking about them. And they literally came from the American intellectuals. And when we're talking about American intellectuals, we're talking about the American Indian intellectuals. The American Indian intellectuals who thought that the European society was nuts. It was nuts to have people starving in the streets. It was nuts to spend hours getting dressed so you could go into a court and subject yourself to this buffoon of a king. They didn't have concepts of equality. They didn't have a concept of freedom. It wasn't in the DNA of Western society. It became part of the writing after, substantially after, it was introduced by what they called the American intellectuals, the Indians. And then it was argued, debated, put down, and then embraced by the intellectuals in Europe. This guy's flipping history and our whole historical thought process, the liberal arts, on its head. The Dawn of Everything, A History of Humanity, David Graeber. He died 2 weeks after the book was published. Spent about 10 years working on this. I got to get to work, wait on some tables. Peace, patience, and persistence, and I'll see you again as soon as I can. Thanks for joining in.